An old woman was ignored at a jewelry auction. Everyone froze when her black card was accepted. The January air bit through Manhattan with unusual cruelty that morning. Sleet pelted against the grand windows of Hartwick's auction house, where the city's elite gathered for the Winter Exceptional Collection viewing. Inside, warmth embraced the attendees as they mingled among display cases of glittering treasures. The space hummed with muted conversation, the gentle clink of champagne flutes, and the hushed reverence reserved for objects of extreme value. Eleanor Winters pulled her worn cashmere coat tighter as she entered through the revolving doors. At 78, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate a world that increasingly overlooked her. Her silver hair was neatly pinned in a simple bun, her face lined with 8 decades of expression. She wore sensible shoes, a simple pearl necklace, and carried a vintage leather handbag that had seen better days 2 decades ago. "Excuse me," she said softly to a young attendant in a tailored black suit who was rushing past with a tray of empty glasses. He glanced at her briefly, his eyes performing the automatic assessment people make dozens of times daily. Elderly woman, modest clothing, probably wandered in from the cold. "The public viewing isn't until tomorrow, ma'am," he said with practiced politeness. "I have an invitation," Eleanor replied, producing a cream-colored card from her purse. The young man took it, eyebrows lifting slightly. "I see. Let me show you to the main gallery." Eleanor followed him past clusters of people who didn't bother to look her way. A tall woman with a severe bob cut and statement jewelry stepped directly in front of her, forcing Eleanor to stop abruptly. The woman didn't even notice as she laughed at something her companion said. The attendant led Eleanor to a quieter corner with several seats. "The auction begins in 30 minutes. May I bring you some water?" "Champagne, please," Eleanor said with a small smile. "And a catalog." He returned promptly with both, clearly having filed her under harmless elderly guest in his mind. Eleanor thanked him and began carefully reviewing the catalog, her finger tracing each item with methodical precision. The Kaufman Diamond Suite was listed as Lot 37. Eleanor studied the description carefully, noting its provenance dating back to 1920s New York high society. The photographs showed an exquisite arrangement of diamonds set in platinum with an Art Deco design sensibility that had defined that glittering era before the crash of '29. From her vantage point, Eleanor observed the room. 3 young tech entrepreneurs huddled near the champagne, their casual attire a deliberate statement against the old money formality. A famous actress tried to blend in beneath oversized sunglasses, her stylist hovering nearby. Old money families clustered together, exchanging air kisses and subtle references to their summer homes. The new money stood more stiffly, their designer clothes still carrying the invisible price tags of recent acquisition. When the announcement came for attendees to take their seats, Eleanor moved toward the auction floor. A woman in her 40s with immaculate blonde hair and a designer suit bumped into her. "Oh!" the woman exclaimed, steadying herself on stiletto heels. She looked at Eleanor with momentary confusion, as if surprised to find an elderly woman in this exclusive space. "Excuse me," she said, her tone suggesting Eleanor was the one who should apologize for existing in her path. Eleanor simply nodded and continued to her seat, settling into the back row where she could observe without being observed. She placed her handbag carefully on her lap and waited patiently as the room filled with eager bidders. No one chose to sit beside her. The auctioneer took his position at the podium, a distinguished man with silver temples and the commanding presence of someone accustomed to orchestrating the exchange of millions of dollars in mere minutes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room, "welcome to Hartwick's Winter Exceptional Collection." Lot 37 was announced after a brief intermission. "The Kaufman Diamond Suite, circa 1925, the auctioneer proclaimed, his voice carrying a note of reverence. "We'll start the bidding at $300,000. A paddle went up immediately from the front row, followed by another across the room. Eleanor observed silently as the figures climbed steadily. 400,000, 450, $500,000. The room crackled with tension as two determined bidders, a silver-haired man representing a private collector and a sleek woman from a prominent jewelry house, drove the price upward. At $750,000, the man hesitated. The auctioneer turned to the woman. $800,000 to the lady from Bergman's. Do I hear $850? Eleanor raised her paddle quietly. The movement was so subtle that the auctioneer's assistant almost missed it. $850 from number 42, the auctioneer announced, his professional mask slipping momentarily as he registered the source of the bid, the elderly woman in the back row whom no one had paid attention to until now. The Bergman's representative turned, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching in surprise. She raised her paddle again. $900,000. Eleanor lifted her paddle once more. The price climbed steadily, the rhythm of the auction now disrupted by this unexpected player. When the bidding reached $1.2 million, the room had grown unusually quiet. All eyes periodically drifted toward the back row where Eleanor sat, her expression calm, her paddle rising with decisive certainty whenever the bid returned to her. $1.5 million, the auctioneer announced after Eleanor's latest bid. The Bergman's representative conferred hastily with someone on her phone, then shook her head slightly. $1.5 million going once, twice. The gavel fell. Sold to bidder number 42. Eleanor rose from her seat and made her way to the payment counter, aware of the eyes following her movement. The same young attendant who had shown her in earlier was now stationed at the counter, his expression a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "See, congratulations on your acquisition, ma'am," he said. "How would you like to arrange payment?" "Card," Eleanor replied simply, opening her worn handbag. The attendant's professional smile remained fixed, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. Auction houses were accustomed to wire transfers for purchases of this magnitude, not credit card transactions. Eleanor produced a black card, not just any premium credit card, but the legendary invitation-only card known for having virtually no spending limit. She placed it gently on the counter. The attendant's eyes widened slightly. He took the card with newfound reverence. "One moment. Ms. Winters," he said, her name now committed to memory. The transaction terminal beeped, and the payment was approved instantly. Across the room, conversations had hushed as people watched the interaction. When the attendant returned the card and presented the receipt with both hands, a palpable shift occurred in the atmosphere. The blonde woman who had bumped into Eleanor earlier was now staring openly. The tech entrepreneurs had stopped mid-conversation. The auction house director, who hadn't noticed Eleanor all morning, was suddenly making his way toward her with the practiced smile of someone who recognizes a valuable client too late. "Ms. Winters," he said warmly, extending his hand. "Charles Hartwick, I don't believe we've had the pleasure. What a magnificent acquisition you've made today." Eleanor accepted his handshake with a gentle grip. "The Kaufman pieces are quite special," she replied. "I've admired them for many years. We would be delighted to arrange secure transportation to your residence," he continued. "Or perhaps you have a private collection manager?" Eleanor's driver, Morris, had been with her for 23 years. He stood beside the sleek black sedan, impeccably dressed in a simple uniform, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw her emerge from the auction house. "Successful day, Ms. Winters?" he asked, opening the door. "Very," she replied, settling into the back seat as an auction house security officer followed with the secured package. "Home, Ms. Winters?" Morris asked once they were alone. "No," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "Let's go to the park first. I could use some air." As the car pulled away from the curb, Eleanor leaned back against the leather seat and closed her eyes briefly. Memories flickered behind her eyelids, not of jewelry or auctions, but of a small apartment above a laundromat in Queens where she'd grown up. of her father's calloused hands counting coins at the kitchen table, of her mother sewing patches on school clothes to make them last another season. Morris navigated skillfully through midtown traffic toward Central Park. Neither spoke. Their decades together had cultivated a comfortable silence. When they arrived, Morris came around to open her door. "Would you like me to walk with you, Miss Winters? The paths might be slippery." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Wait here. I won't be long." The January chill had cleared most casual visitors from the park. Eleanor walked slowly along the path, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. She found an empty bench overlooking the pond and sat down, placing the package from the auction house beside her. 56 years earlier, Eleanor had sat on a bench much like this one, a young woman of 22 with a secretarial certificate and determination that outweighed her circumstances. She'd been reading the classified ads, circling potential positions with a worn pencil when Martin Kaufman had sat down beside her. Martin had been 40 then, already successful in real estate development, but not yet the force he would become. He'd apologized for interrupting her, asked if she minded sharing the bench. They'd talked about the city, about ambition, about the buildings rising around them. By the end of that chance meeting, he'd offered her a job as his assistant. What followed was history that few people knew. Eleanor became not just Martin's assistant, but his most trusted advisor. When he recognized her exceptional instinct for property valuation, he sent her to night school for finance and business. When other executives questioned her presence in meetings, Martin made it clear, "Eleanor stays or I go." By the time Martin died 20 years ago, Eleanor was the operational heart of Kaufman Properties, a fact known within the company, but kept private from the outside world at Eleanor's insistence. Martin's children were content with their trust funds and board positions that required minimal effort. They happily left day-to-day operations to the fille, the family friend, Prefet, who understood their father's vision. Eleanor managed the empire from behind the scenes, her name appearing on legal documents but rarely in press releases or business publication. She lived modestly by choice in the same Upper East Side apartment she'd purchased in the 1980s. She donated quietly to educational causes. She wore good quality clothing until it wore out. The trappings of wealth had never interested her, with one exception. Back in her apartment that evening, Eleanor placed the diamond suite on her dressing table and studied it under the warm light. The stones caught the glow and fractured it into countless tiny rainbows. History and beauty intertwined in platinum settings that had witnessed a century of human drama. Her phone rang, the landline she preferred to the smartphone that her assistant insisted she carry. The caller ID showed Kaufman Properties. Eleanor smiled slightly and picked up. "Eleanor Winters speaking." "Ms. Winters, it's Alex." The young voice belonged to Alexandra Kaufman, Martin's granddaughter and the only family member who showed genuine interest in the business. "I just heard about the auction. Is it true?" "News travels fast," Eleanor observed. "My cousin's wife was there. She called me immediately." Alex sounded excited. "She said you caused quite a stir." "I simply purchased something I wanted. Grandmother's diamonds." Alex's voice softened. "I've only seen them in old photographs. Perhaps you should come for tea tomorrow," Eleanor suggested. "I'd like you to see them." After arranging the details, Eleanor hung up and prepared for bed with her usual methodical routine. As she moved around her modest apartment, nothing in her surroundings suggested the wealth she controlled. The furniture was well made, but not ostentatious. The art was chosen for personal connection rather than investment value. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at Kaufman Properties, headquarters on Fifth Avenue at her usual time, 7:30 a.m., well before most employees. The security guard nodded respectfully as she passed. "Morning, Ms. Winters." She took the executive elevator to the top floor, where her office adjoined what had been Martin's, now technically belonging to his son Richard, though he rarely occupied it. Eleanor's assistant, James, was already at his desk despite the early hour. "Good morning, Ms. Winters," he said, rising as she approached. Congratulations on your acquisition yesterday. The news is all over the luxury circuit this morning. Thank you, James, she replied, accepting the coffee he handed her, prepared exactly as she preferred. Is the Thompson Street development report ready? On your desk, along with the quarterly projection. Mr. Richard called and asked to reschedule tomorrow's lunch. Ms. Alexandra confirmed she'll meet you at your apartment at 4 today. Eleanor nodded and continued into her office. Spacious, but not extravagant, with a wall of windows overlooking the city she had helped shape over 5 decades. She settled at her desk and began reviewing documents with the same focused attention she had applied throughout her career. At noon, the door opened after a soft knock, and a young woman entered carrying a tablet. Ms. Winters, I'm Sophie Chen, the new junior analyst in acquisitions. Mr. Blake asked me to bring you the Bronx development analysis personally. Eleanor looked up, assessing the newcomer. Sophie appeared to be in her mid-20s, dressed in a sensible suit, her expression earnest and slightly nervous. Thank you, Ms. Chen. Please, sit. Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her desk. Tell me your thoughts on the project. Sophie hesitated. My thoughts? I just ran the numbers that... I assume you formed opinions while analyzing the data? Eleanor interrupted gently. I'd like to hear them. For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor listened as Sophie tentatively, then, with growing confidence, outlined her concerns about gentrification effects and suggested alternative approaches that might balance profit with community benefit. When she finished, Sophie looked worried. I apologize if I overstepped. I know this isn't part of my role. On the contrary, Eleanor said, this is exactly your role. Analysis without insight is just arithmetic. Martin Kaufman built this company by understanding that buildings are about people, not just profit margins. She made a note on her desk calendar. I'd like you to attend the development committee meeting on Thursday. Bring these thoughts with you. Alexandra Kaufman arrived at Eleanor's apartment precisely at 4, bringing a small bouquet of Eleanor's favorite flowers, Lily of the Valley, a detail that few people would have remembered. At 32, Alex bore a striking resemblance to her grandfather, with the same analytical eyes and determined chin. The security guard downstairs was impressed. I was visiting you, Alex said as she handed Eleanor the flowers. Apparently, you're quite the celebrity after yesterday. Eleanor arranged the flowers in a simple vase. 15 minutes of fame for an old woman with a credit card. Tea? They settled in Eleanor's living room with tea served in the English style Eleanor preferred. The diamond suite lay in its open case on the coffee table between them, catching the afternoon light. They're even more beautiful than in the photographs, Alex said softly, leaning forward to study the intricate workmanship. Your great-grandmother wore them to the opening of the first Kaufman building in 1924, Eleanor explained. Your grandfather always regretted that they left the family. Alex looked up from the diamond, her expression thoughtful. That's why you bought them? For grandfather? Partly, Eleanor acknowledged, but also because beautiful things should be preserved. History matters. You know, Alex said. My father and uncles are in a panic today. They think you're planning something dramatic. And what do you think? I think if you wanted to be dramatic, you wouldn't have waited 50 years. Alex placed the necklace back in its case. But I do think you're sending a message. Eleanor smiled slightly. Perhaps. The board meeting next week, Alex continued. They're planning to vote on the Roosevelt Island proposal, the one that would demolish those historic apartments for luxury condos. I'm aware. They think you'll vote with them because it's profitable. But I've seen your notes on the preservation alternatives. Eleanor took a sip of tea before responding. Martin believed that legacy wasn't measured in quarterly returns. The company carries his name, not his vision. The family thinks they run Kaufman Properties, Alex said carefully. But it's you, isn't it? It's always been you. Instead of answering directly, Eleanor rose and walked to a small writing desk in the corner. She removed a folder and returned to her seat. These are the voting shares of Kaufman Properties, she explained, sliding the document toward Alex. Martin restructured the company before he died. The family holds 40% collectively. 15% belongs to the employee trust. And the rest? Alex asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. The remaining 45% belongs to me, Eleanor confirmed. Martin knew his children had different priorities. Alex stared at the document, then at Eleanor. Kauf, why are you showing me this now? Because next month I turn 79, and succession planning matters. Eleanor placed her teacup down precisely. The Roosevelt Island project is a crossroads for this company's future. We can chase maximum profit, or we can balance profit with purpose, as Martin intended. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and cold. Eleanor dressed with particular care, selecting a well-tailored suit she reserved for important occasion. Morris drove her to the Kaufman building, maintaining their comfortable silence. When they arrived, he came around to open her door as always. Thank you, Morris. I may be a while. The boardroom occupied half of the top floor, its windows offering panoramic views of the city. Eleanor arrived 15 minutes early, as was her custom, finding only Alexandra already there, reviewing documents at the far end of the table. Good morning, Eleanor, Alex said, rising. Alexandra. Eleanor nodded, taking her seat at the head of the table, the position she had occupied since Martin's death, though many assumed it was merely honorary. Gradually, the other board members arrived. Richard Kaufman, Martin's eldest son, entered with his brothers Thomas and Howard. All three nodded to Eleanor with the distracted politeness of men who acknowledged her presence without truly seeing her. The other members filtered in: legal counsel, the CFO, representatives from major investors. At precisely 10 a.m., Eleanor called the meeting to order. The routine business proceeded efficiently under her guidance. Quarterly reports, market analyses, strategic planning. Throughout, Eleanor spoke little but listened intently, occasionally directing questions that revealed her comprehensive grasp of the company's operation. Finally, they reached the Roosevelt Island proposal. Richard presented the plan with enthusiasm, emphasizing the projected returns and premium positioning. The historic apartments currently occupying the site were dismissed as outdated structure that failed to maximize the location's potential. When he finished, Eleanor thanked him politely. Are there alternative perspectives to consider before we vote? A brief silence followed. The room had grown accustomed to Eleanor asking this question as a formality, typically followed by immediate voting. Actually, Alex said, rising from her seat, I've prepared an alternative proposal. Surprise registered on several faces as Alex distributed folders to each board member. For the next 20 minutes, she presented a comprehensive plan that preserved the historic buildings while developing adjacent parcels with a mix of luxury and affordable units. Her presentation included financial projections showing lower initial returns but stronger long-term value and community benefit. When she finished, Richard laughed dismissively. Very creative, Alex, but we're not running a charity. The numbers don't justify the preservation costs. I disagree, Eleanor said quietly. Every head turned toward her. Son, Alexandra's analysis accounts for tax incentives, heritage grants, and long-term appreciation that your proposal overlooks. With all due respect, Aunt Eleanor, Richard replied, his tone making it clear respect was minimal. This is a business decision that requires financial expertise and market understanding. Eleanor's expression remained impassive. Indeed it does. Shall we vote? Richard smiled confidently. Motion to approve the original development plan as presented. Seconded, Thomas added quickly. Eleanor nodded. All in favor of Richard's proposal. The three Kaufman brothers raised their hands, along with two investor representatives. 5 votes. All opposed. Alexandra raised her hand immediately. The CFO hesitated, then joined her. Legal counsel followed. 3 votes. All eyes turned to Eleanor, whose vote would typically break the tie. Instead, she opened a folder before her. Before casting my vote, I should clarify the voting structure. She removed a document and passed it to legal counsel. As you'll see, my shares constitute 45% of voting rights. The employee trust, which has instructed me to vote on their behalf, represents 15%. The room grew utterly still as the implications became clear. Therefore, Eleanor continued calmly, I cast 60% of votes against the original proposal and in favor of Alexandra's alternative. Richard's face flushed dark red. This is... You can't. He turned to legal counsel. Is this legitimate? The lawyer reviewed the document carefully, then nodded. Everything appears in order. Ms. Winters has controlling interest when combined with the employee trust. This company belongs to the Kaufman family, Howard protested. And it still does, Eleanor replied. Just not in the way you assumed. She turned to Alexandra. Ms. Kaufman's proposal is approved. This meeting is adjourned. As the board members filed out in stunned silence, Richard paused at the door. This isn't over, Aunt Eleanor.